Hare Krishna. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjala Shalakya Saksuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shigurave Namaha. Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namini Namaste Saraswata Devi Gauravani Pacharani Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paskachai Desatarani. Hare Krishna. Today we will continue with discussing the second chapter of the seventh canto, the Hiranyakashipu, the king of the demons. We have heard last time the introduction of an angry Hiranyakashipu, fixed in anger on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we heard about his mentality, about his desire to kill Lord Vishnu.
Recording in progress.
Just a moment. Okay. And we heard also about his preaching. His preaching, which was very much motivated. He wanted to pacify his mother and his nephews, his family members. But he was preaching it, but he's not applying it himself. I see there is some echo, and can everyone mute himself, please? Ananda Dulal Prabhu, can you mute yourself? Can you mute yourself? Maybe. Okay, now it's better. So Hiranyakashipu made his philosophical points just a moment, because there is still an echo. Ananda Dulal Prabhu, please mute, yeah. Now it seemed to be better. Good. So now we will hear some stories. Hiranyakashipu will preach or tell some stories that are supporting his philosophical points. And we start with verse 27. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Atrapyuda arantinam itihasam puratanam yamasya preta bandhunam samvadam tam nibodhata. In this regard, an example is given from an old history. This involves a discourse between Yamaraj and the friends of a dead person. Please hear it attentively. Purport. The words itihasam Puratanam mean an old story. The Puranas are not chronologically recorded, but the incidents mentioned in the Puranas are actually histories by bygone ages. Srimad Bhagavatam is the Mahapurana, the essence of all the Puranas. The Mayavadi scholars do not accept the Puranas, but Srila Madhvacharya and all other authorities accept them as the authoritative histories of the world. In the state known as Ushinar, there was a celebrated king named Sujahya. When the king was killed in battle by his enemies, his kingsmen sat down around the dead body and began to lament the death of their friend. His golden bejeweled armor smashed, his ornaments and garlands fallen from their places, his hair scattered, and his eyes lusterless. The slain king lay on the battlefield, his entire body smeared with blood, his heart pierced by the arrows of the enemy. When he died, he had wanted to show his prowess, and thus he had bitten his lips, and his teeth remained in that position. His beautiful lotus-like face was now black and covered with dust from the battlefield. His arms, with his sword and other weapons, were cut and broken. When the queens of the king of Ushinar saw their husband lying in that position, they began crying, "O Lord, now that you have been killed, we also have been killed." Repeating these words again and again, they fell down, pounding their breasts at their feet of the dead king. Purport. As stating here, Rabasa Dasa Dashadam, the dead king, while fighting in anger, bit his lips to show his prowess, but nonetheless he was killed by providence, Vidina. This proves that we are controlled by higher authorities. Our personal power or endeavor is not always supreme. We must therefore accept the position offered to us by the order of the Supreme. As the queens loudly cried, their tears glided down their breasts, becoming reddened by kumkum powder, and fell upon the lotus feet of their husband. Their hair became disarrayed, their ornaments fell, and in a way that evoked sympathy from the hearts of others, the queens began lamenting their husband's death. O Lord, you have now been removed by cruel providence to a state beyond our sight. You had previously sustained the livelihood of the inhabitants of Ushinar, and thus they were happy. But your condition now is the cause of their unhappiness. O king, O hero, you were a very grateful husband and the most sincere friend of all of us. How shall we exist without you? O hero, wherever you are going, please direct us there so that we may follow in your footsteps and engage again in your service. Let us go along with you. So can someone read the purport, please?
Formerly, a Kshatriya king was generally the husband of many wives, and after the death of the kings, especially in the battlefield, all the queens would agree to accept Sahamarana, dying with the husband who was their life. When Pandu Maharaja, the father of the Pandavas, died, his two wives, namely the mother of Yudhishthira, Bhima and Arjuna, and the mother of Nakula, and Sahadeva were both ready to die in the fire with their husband. Later, after a compromise was Kunti stayed alive to care for the little children, and the other wife, Matri, was allowed to die with her husband. This system of Sahamarana continued in India even until the time of British rule, but later it was discouraged. Since the attitude of wives gradually changed with the advancement of Kali Yuga, thus the system of Sahamarana has practically been abolished. Nevertheless, within the past 50
Yeah.
when a husband died, both the husband and the wife were taken in procession in the mourning cart. Such intense love of a chaste wife for her husband is a special case.
That,
Thank you.
so after the death of the king, all queens would agree to accept Sahamarana dying with the husband. So they are lamenting. They are lamenting not only for the death of the king, but also for their own death, which is approaching. So it's not without motive that, of course, this practice has been abolished by the British rule. It was also misused. The queens or the wife who became a widow, widows were forced to enter the pyre of the dead husband. Good. Next. The time was appropriate for the body to be burned, but the queens, not allowing it to be taken away, continued lamenting for the dead body, which they kept on their laps. In meantime, the sun completed its movements for setting in the west. So they didn't want to stop lamenting because they knew when the funeral pyre is put on fire, they would need to enter it. And the sun completes its movement. That means normally the dead body should be burned for the sun setting. And that's a Vedic system which is explained here in the purport. Can someone read the purport, please?
Yes, Maharaj, Hare Krishna.
Please.
According to the Vedic system, if a person dies during the daytime, it's customary for his funeral ceremony to be performed before the sun sets, regardless of whether he is burned or buried. And if he dies at night, the funeral must be completed before the next sunrise. Apparently, the queens continued lamenting for the dead body, the lump of matter, and would not allow it to be taken away for burning. This illustrates the strong grip of illusion among foolish persons who consider the body the self. Women are generally considered less intelligent. Because of ignorance only, the queens thought of the dead body as their husband, and somehow or the other thought that if the body were kept, their husband would remain with them. Such a conception of the self is certainly for Gokara, cows and asses. We have actually seen that sometimes when a cow's calf has died, the milkman cheats the cow by presenting before her the dead body of her calf. Thus the cow who would not otherwise allow milking licks the dead body of the calf and allows herself to be milked. This substantiates the description of the Shastra that a foolish man in the bodily conception of life is like a cow. Not only do foolish men and women consider the body the self, but we have seen that the dead body of a so-called yogi was kept for days by his disciples, who thought that their guru was in samadhi. When decomposition began and a bad smell unfortunately began to overwhelm the yogic power, the disciples allowed the dead body of the so-called yogi to be burned. Thus, the bodily concept of life is extremely strong among foolish persons who are compared to cows and asses. Nowadays, great scientists are trying to freeze dead bodies so that in the future these frozen bodies may again be brought to life. The incident narrated by Hiranyakashipu from history must have taken millions of years ago because Hiranyakashipu lived millions of years ago and was even then quoting from history. Thus, the incident occurred before Hiranyakashipu's lifetime. But the same ignorance in the bodily concept of life is still prevalent, not only among laymen, but even among scientists who think they will be able to revive frozen corpses. Apparently, the queens did not want to deliver the dead body for burning because they were afraid of dying with the dead body of their husband. Hare Krishna, thank you.
Hare Krishna. So those who are less intelligent, they identify with the body. And that's practically all of us in this material world. This body concept is very, very strong. And it has this influence of material nature. And even before Hiranyakashipu's time, millions of years ago, that was the case. Next. While the queens were lamenting for the dead body of the king, their loud cries were heard even from the abode of Yamaraj. Assuming the body of a boy, Yamaraj personally approached the relatives of the dead body and advised them as follows. Sometimes living entity is forced to give up his body and enter enter another one according to the judgment of Yamaraj. It is difficult, however, for the conditioned soul to enter another body unless the present dead body is annihilated through cremation or some other means. The living being has attachment for the present body and does not want to enter another, and thus in the interim he remains a ghost. If a living being who has already left his body has been pious, Yamaraj, just to give him relief, will give him another body. Since the living being in the body of a king had some attachment to his body, he was hovering as a ghost, and therefore Yamaraj, as a special consideration, approached the lamenting relatives to instruct them personally. Yamaraj approached them as a child, because a child is not restricted, but is granted admittance anywhere, even to the palace of a king. Besides this, the child was speaking philosophy. People are very much interested in hearing philosophy when it is spoken by a child. So Yamaraj, he got disturbed by their lamentation, and he decided to appear in the form of a young boy and instruct them. We will now hear the instructions of Yamaraj. Sri Yamaraj Uvacha. Sri Yamaraj said, Alas, how amazing it is! These persons who are older than me have full experience that hundreds and thousands of living entities have taken birth and died. Thus they should understand that they also are apt to die. Yet still they are bewildered. The conditioned soul comes from an unknown place and returns after death to that same unknown place. There is no exception to this rule, which is conducted by material nature. Knowing this, why do they usually lament? So Lord Krishna also in the Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, he instructs Arjuna in a similar way, that so he says, one who has taken his birth is sure to die, and after death one is sure to take birth again. Therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament that. So Krishna says, everyone who takes birth must die. That's the most sure thing in this world. We all know death is going to come. It's unavoidable. But when it happens, we are surprised and we lament that, like it's unexpected, this person has left now. But no, that's the most sure thing. You take birth, you will die. When Krishna says you die, you will take birth. That means the soul is eternal, it will continue his way. There's no reason to lament. The soul is alive, and the soul does not die. It's eternal. Similarly, Krishna says in the next verse in Bhagavad Gita, Avyaktadini Bhutani Vyakta Madhyani Bharata Avyakta Nidanam Yeva Tatrakar Paridevana. All created beings are manifest in their beginning, manifest in their interim state, and manifest again when annihilated. So what need is there for lamentation? So Yamaraj says the same. He said, unmanifest. They come from an unknown place before. And after that they go to the same unknown place. So what is the question for lamenting? Even if you don't believe in the soul, that before there was nothing, the void, and after there is void. You go from the void to the void, so what is the point? That this is Krishna's argument, and that's how Prabhupada has explained it in a lecture, from the void to the void. So what's the point to lament? That because it means the material body has no factual existence. That it is something like a dream. That it has no factual existence in relation to the spirit soul. That so Prabhupada is purport here. Can someone read the 2 paragraphs which are on the screen, please?
Accepting that there are two classes of philosophers, one believing in the existence of the soul and the other believing in its not believing in its existence, there is no cause for lamentation in either case. Non-believers in the existence of the soul are called atheists by followers of Vedic wisdom. Yet, even if for argument's sake we accept the atheistic theory, there is still no cause for lamentation. Apart from the existence of the soul, the material elements remain unmanifested before creation. From this settled state of unmanifestation comes manifestation. Just as from ether, air is generated, from air, fire is generated, from fire, water is generated, and from water, earth becomes manifested. From the earth, many varieties of manifestations take place. For example, a big skyscraper is manifested from the earth. When it is dismantled, the manifestation becomes again unmanifested and remains as atoms in the ultimate stage. The law of conservation of energy remains, but in the course of time, things are manifested and unmanifested. That is the difference. Then, what cause is there for lamentation in either manifestation or unmanifestation? Somehow or other, even in the unmanifested stage, things are not lost. Both at the beginning and at the end, all elements remain unmanifested, and this does not make any real material difference. If we accept the Vedic conclusion as stated in Bhagavad Gita, Antavandai me dehaha, that these material bodies are perishable in due course of time, nityasya sariraha, but that the soul is eternal, then we must remember always that the body is like a dress. Therefore, why lament the changing of a dress? The material body has no factual existence in relation to the eternal soul. It is something like a dream. In a dream, we may think of flying in the sky or sitting on a chariot as a king. But when we wake up, we can see that we are neither in the sky nor seated on the chariot. The Vedic wisdom encourages self-realization on the basis of non-existence of the material body. Therefore, in either case, whether one believes in the existence of the soul or one does not believe in the existence of the soul, there is no cause for lamentation for the loss of the body.
In the Mahabharata, it is said, Adarshana eyayata punasya darshanam gata. This statement could support the theory of the atheistic scientist that the child in the womb of the mother has no life but is simply a lump of matter. To follow this theory, if the lump of matter is aborted by a surgical operation, no life is killed. The body of a child is like a tumor, and if a tumor is operated upon and thrown away, no sin is involved. The same argument could be put forward in regarding to the king and his queens. The body of the king was manifested from an unmanifest source, and again it became unmanifest for manifestation. Since manifestation exists only in the middle between the 2 points of unmanifestation, why should one cry for the body manifested in the interim? So that is atheistic view. Even from the atheistic view, there is no need for lamentation. Now, Yamaraj, he will speak out of experience, and he says it is wonderful that these elderly women do not have a higher sense of life than we do. Indeed, we are most fortunate, although we are children and have been left to struggle in material life, unprotected by father and mother, and although we are weak, we have not been vanquished or eaten by ferocious animals. Thus we have firm belief that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who has given us protection even in the womb of the mother, will protect us everywhere. So, Yamaraj plays the role of a young child who has no father and a mother, and he says, I'm being protected by the Supreme Lord, even in the womb. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Ishvara sarvabhutnam ritsayunatishthati. The Lord is present in the core of everyone's heart. Thus the Lord gives protection to everyone and gives the different types of bodies the living entity wants to enjoy. Everything is done by the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, therefore one should not lament the birth and death of a living being, which has been arranged by the Supreme Lord. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Sarvasya saha redishani fishti matta shmitiganam apamsha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness. One must act according to the direction of the Lord within the heart. But because a conditioned soul wants to act independently, the Lord gives him the facility to act and experience the reactions. The Lord says, Sarvadam Prachya Mam Kam Sramvacha, give up all other duties and simply surrender unto me. One who does not abide by the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is given the facility to enjoy in this material world. Instead of restricting him, the Lord gives the conditioned souls the opportunity to enjoy, so that by mature experience, after many births, Bhaunam Namanti, he will understand that surrender to the Lord's feet of Vasudev is the only duty of all. living beings. So we get bodies for our rectification. That now we will go to this pastime and then go back. The boy addressed the women, "O weak women, only by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is never diminished, is the entire world created, maintained, and again annihilated. This is the verdict of Vedic knowledge. This material creation, consisting of the moving and non-moving, is exactly like his plating. Being the Supreme Lord, is completely competent to destroy and protect. So Krishna creates, maintains, annihilates, destroys and protects. So in this regard, the queens might argue, if our husband was protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead when in the womb, why was he not being given protection now? To this question, the answer is, Ya itcha yesa shriaditam avayo yaiva avalumpate saya. One cannot argue with the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord is always free, and therefore he can protect and can also annihilate. He is our order carrier, but whatever he likes, he will do. Therefore, he is the Supreme Lord. The Lord does not create this material world at anyone's request, and therefore he can annihilate everything merely by his will. That is a supremacy. If one argues, why does he act in this way? The answer is that he can do so because he is the Supreme. No one can question his activities. If one argues, what is the purpose of his sinful creation and annihilation? The answer is that to prove his omnipotence, he can do anything, and no one can question him. If he were answerable to us concerning why he does something and why he does not, his supremacy would be curtailed. So we cannot order the Supreme Lord. He is free to do whatever he wants. So this is also called providence. That we will go back to that soon. But we have the same experience. In our lives, we have seen so many people dying. So many. And we know we are the next. We are the next. But still, we have some hope that it won't happen to us, which is foolish. Sometimes one loses money on a public street where everyone can see it, and yet this money is protected by destiny and not seen by others. Thus the man who lost it gets it back. On the other hand, if the Lord does not give protection, even money maintained very securely at home is lost. If the Supreme Lord gives one protection, even though one has no protector and is in the jungle, one means a life, whereas a person well protected at home by relatives, another sometimes dies, not being able to protect him. Prahlad Maharaj will say the same thing in his teachings, that there is that verse from the further in the 7th canto. I think these are his prayers to Lord Nrsimhadev. Balasyanaya saranam pitara nrsinga nartasya sagadamudam vatimachatana taptasyata patividvir yayan yasyastas tavan fibo tanuvitam tvat upekshitanam. My Lord Nrsimhadev, O Supreme, because of bodily conception of life embodied souls neglected and not cared for by you, cannot do anything for their betterment. Whatever remedies they accept, although perhaps temporarily beneficial, are certainly impermanent. For example, a father and mother cannot protect their child. A physician and medicine cannot relieve a suffering patient. And a boat on the ocean cannot protect a drowning man. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, in a certain chapter, the story is told of Narada Muni. Narada Muni meets Mihrari the hunter, who is killing animals. With his arrows, he pierces them, and they are half dead, struggling. And Narada Muni comes and meets this hunter, and he gives him a vision of the reactions that will come as a result of his sinful actions. And Mihrari the hunter comes to his senses and says to Narada Muni, what can I do about it? How can I atone for that? And Narada Muni says, I will tell you, but you have first to break your bow. And Mihrari say, breaking my bow, but this is my livelihood. How will I live? And Narada Muni replies, don't worry about that, Krishna will maintain you. In the purport there of this first Srila Prabhupada thinks that people think that they are maintained by their work. But that's not true. It is the Supreme Lord who maintains all living entities. So we think it's by our work we are maintained, but no, it's the Supreme Lord. So yes, the Lord maintains people, everyone, protects or destroys. And he does that as he desires, of course. He gives reactions to our past activities because he wants us to give up this tendency to exploit material nature. He wants us to come back to Godhead. So why this happens, we cannot see. It's called providence, but behind providence is Krishna. So, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, these are examples of the supremacy of the Lord. Our plans to protect and annihilate do not act, but whatever he thinks of doing actually happens. So we have many plans to protect, to annihilate, but also to enjoy and to be happy. These things do not happen. Material nature will not agree with our plans. It may go on for some time, but finally there is frustration. It is not wealth that will make us happy. Because wealth does not give happiness to the soul. So, if the Lord does not give protection, even money maintained very securely at home is lost and so on. So these are examples of the supremacy of the Lord. Our plans to protect or annihilate do not act. He thinks of doing actually happens. So if Krishna desires something, it happens. The examples given in this regard are practical. Everyone has had such practical experience. And there are also many other clear examples. For instance, Prahlad Maharaj has said that a child is certainly dependent on his father and mother, but in spite of their presence, the child is harassed in many ways, sometimes in spite of a supply of good medicine and an experienced physician, a patient does not survive. So Prabhupada really transliterates here that verse that I just have read from Prahlad Maharaj. So therefore, since everything is dependent on the free will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our only duty is to surrender Him and seek His protection. So, in other words, we have done so many activities in past lives and we get reactions in this life. And Krishna is going to decide which reaction you will get at what point. That He decides. He can delay that reaction. He can give you temporary good reactions for your good deeds and later the other reactions. But He's going to decide. And we don't have control about that. That's providence. Every conditioned soul receives a different type of body to its work. And when the engagement is finished, the body is finished. Although the spirit soul is situated in subtle and gross material bodies in different forms of life, he is not bound by them, for he is always understood to be completely different from the manifested body. The soul has really nothing to do with this material situation, but we are imagining that we are these bodies and that our actions and reactions are hurting us, the soul, and it's difficult to understand. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 13:30, Prakrichev sakarmani kriyamani sarvasa yapasa tatadma makartaram napashati. One who can see that in all activities are performed by the body which is created by material nature, and see that the self does nothing, the soul does nothing, does only desire, actually sees that So yes, that's the material energy, difficult to understand for us. And by the grace of Hiranyakasipu, we are learning this philosophy now. We should not forget that is Jai from the spiritual world, although in his manifestation as Hiranyakasipu, he has no interest in applying this philosophy. So every conditioned soul receives a different type of body according to its work. And when the engagement is finished, the body is finished. Although the spirit soul is situated in subtle and gross material bodies in different forms of life, is not bound by them. Is always understood to be completely different from the manifested body. Can someone read the purport, please?
Here it is very plainly explained that the God is not responsible for the living entities, accepting different types of bodies. One has to accept a body according to the laws of nature and one's own karma. Therefore, the Vedic intention is that a person engaged in the material activities should be given direction by which he can intelligently apply his activities to the service of the Lord, to become free from the material bondage of repeated birth and death. Swakarmana tvam abhicharya siddhim vindati manavaha. The Lord is always ready to give direction. Indeed, His direction are elaborately given in Bhagavad Gita. If we take advantage of this direction, then in spite of our being conditioned by the laws of material nature, we shall become free to attain our virginal constitution. Mam ye vaye prapadyante mayam etan tarantyate. We should have firm faith that the Lord is supreme and that if we surrender to Him, He will take charge of us and indicate how we can get out of material life and return home back to Godhead. Without such surrender, one is obliged to accept a certain type of body according to his karma, sometimes as an animal, sometimes a demigod, and so on. Although the body is obtained and lost in due course of time, the spirit soul does not actually mix with the body, but is substituted by particular modes of nature with which he is sinfully associated. Spiritual education changes one's consciousness so that one simply carries out orders of Supreme Lord and become free from the influence of mode of material nature.
Thank you. So yes, surrender to Krishna means respecting providence or the will of the Lord. Accepting in our lives that we have to follow Krishna's instructions, surrender. Man manabhav madbhakto machi mam namaskuru. We think of Krishna, we become his devotee, we worship him, we offer him respect. That is what Krishna wants. And what comes by providence, that we should learn to accept as the will of the Lord, that as the mercy of the Lord. What we think is good, we accept as the mercy of the Lord, but we have also to learn what we think is bad, the suffering that comes and so on. This is also the mercy of the Lord to rectify us. And then we come then we make progress toward being situated in appropriate sambandha jnana, knowledge of our relation of Krishna, by accepting everything as a mercy of the Lord. That is what Brahma, of course, expresses in his prayers. Tatena kampam susamikshmano punchatma ivatma kitam vipapakam pritvarva purvir vidadanamaste shivetiyo muktipadesh daibak. Accept everything as a mercy of the Lord. Krishna gives me suffering, but he gives me only a little. That a small portion of what I deserve. That accepting this as his mercy, one is surely to make progress on the spiritual path. That good. 42. Just as a householder, although different from the identity of his house, thinks his house to be identical with him, so the conditioned soul, due to ignorance, accepts the body to be himself, although the body is actually different from the soul. The body is obtained through a combination of portions of earth, water and fire, and when the earth, water, fire are transformed in the course of time, the body is vanquished. The soul has nothing to do with this creation and dissolution of the body. So can someone read a small purport?
We transmigrate from one body to another in the bodies that are product of our illusion. But as a spirit soul, we always exist separately from material, conditional life. The example given here is that a house or car is always different from its owner. But because of attachment, the conditioned soul thinks it to be identical with him. A car or house is actually made of metal elements. As long as the metal elements combine together properly, the car or house exists. And when they are disassembled, the house or the car is disassembled. The spirit soul, however, always remains as he is.
So ahamkar, we think we are the kar. that, but yes, this ahankar relates also to identifying with the mind. That Hare Krishna. As fire, although situated in wood, is perceived to be different from the wood, as air situated within the mouth and nostrils is perceived to be separate, and as sky, although all-pervading, never mixed with anything, so the living entity, although now encaged within the material body, of which it is the source, is separate from it. That, so in the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, quotes the verse that 7:4 Bhumira Panala Vayakama the Buddhiriv Shankarityane Prakati Bina Prakati Astata. That so all these material energies that we see them as separate from the Lord, but actually they are not. That so this material energy, it's factual. Matter exists, but matter exists only for those who have a gross material body. That like you have earth, water, fire, air, ether. That's the gross body. If we, at the time of death, the subtle body and the super soul, under the control, under the guidance of the super soul, leaves the gross body. And it goes to the wall. Because the subtle body is more subtle than the wall. That so it does not exist when we have only a subtle body. For the demigods, this gross matter doesn't exist. They walk through it. They sit on a cloud. that is These are the gross and the subtle material energies. When Rava met Narada Muni and Ravan wanted to kill Narada Muni and took his sword, and with his sword he went to the body of Narada Muni, and Narada Muni was still dancing there and chanting the holy names of the Lord. And Ravan said, what kind of body do you have? And Narada Muni said, oh, this is an eternal spiritual body. And Ravan asked, can I also get such a body? And Narada Muni said, oh yes, you just worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that Vishnu. And then Ravan became angry, of course. But factually, the soul has never contact with the material body. So as fire appears separate from wood, and as air flowing to the nostrils and mouth of the body appear separate from the body, so the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appears separate from the living entity, but is actually separate and not separate simultaneously. This is the philosophy of Asintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, propounded by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. According to the reactions of karma, the living being appears separate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but actually is very intimately related with the Lord. Consequently, even though we now seem neglected by the Lord, He is always alert to our activities under all circumstances. Therefore, we should simply depend on the supremacy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus survive our intimate relationship with Him. We must depend upon the authority and the control of the Personality of Godhead. So this big controller of material nature is in our heart. And yes, That is the message: revive our intimate relationship with Him. So now Yamaraj becomes more heavy. Remember, he's in the form of a young boy, attractive boy, and he says, "Oh, lamenters, you are fools. The person named Sujahya from whom you lament is still lying before you and has not gone anywhere. Then what is the cause for your lamentation? Previously he heard and replied to you, and now you are not finding him, you are lamenting. This is contradictory behavior, for you have never actually seen the person within the body who heard you and replied. There is no need for your lamentation, for the body you have always seen is lying here." It's interesting, this is straightforward preaching. But if you tell that to atheistic people, envious people, they cannot understand anything of what is said here, although it's very clear. Can someone read the purport, please?
Thanks, Maharaj.
Yes.
This instruction by Yamaraj in the form of a boy is understandable even for a common man. A common man who considers the body, the self, is certainly comparable to an animal. Yasyatma buddhihi gunapetri dhatuke saiva bhokharaha. But even a common man can understand that after death a person is gone. Although the body is still there, a dead man's relatives lament that the person has gone away. For a common man sees the body but cannot see the soul. As described in Bhagavad Gita, Dehino Asmin Pita Dehe. The soul, the proprietor of the body, is within. After death, when the breath within the nostrils has stopped, one can understand that the person within the body who was hearing and replying has now gone. Therefore, in effect, the common man concludes that actually the spirit soul was different from the body and has now gone away. Thus, even the common man, coming to his senses, can know that the real person who was within the body and was hearing and replying was never seen. For that which was never seen, what is the need of lamentation?
Yes. So if they think the king was the body, so the body is still there, what need is for lamentation? In the body, the most important substance is the life air, but that also is neither the listener nor the speaker. Beyond even the life air, the soul also can do nothing, for the supersoul is actually the director. In cooperation with the individual soul, the supersoul conducting the activities of the body is different from the body and living force. Okay, can someone read that purport? It's good to read all these purports. Okay.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead distinctly says in Bhagavad Gita 15.15, Sarvasya chaha vidi sanni vishwa matta smriti gyanam apahanancha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Although the Atma or soul is present in every material body, Dehenasmi Yatha Dehe, he is not actually the chief person acting through the senses, mind, and so on. The soul can merely act in cooperation with the super soul because it is the super soul who gives him directions to act or not to act. Matta Smriti Ganam Apahanancha. One cannot act without his sanction, for the super soul is Upadrashta and Anumanta, the witness and sanctioner. One who studies carefully under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master can understand the real knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is actually the conductor of all the activities of the individual soul and the controller of their results as well. Although the individual soul possesses the indriyas or senses, he is not actually the proprietor, for the proprietor is the super soul. Consequently, the super soul is called Rishikesha, and the individual soul is advised by the direction of the super soul to surrender to him and thus be happy. Sarvadharman parityajyam mamekam sharanam vraja. Thus he can become immortal and be transferred to the spiritual kingdom where he will achieve the high success of an eternal blissful life of knowledge. In conclusion, the individual soul is different from the body, senses, living force, and the airs within the body. And above him is the super soul who gives the individual soul all facilities. The individual soul who renders everything to the super soul lives very happily within the body. Thank you.
So gradually, Yamaraj is explaining we are not a gross body, we are not a subtle body, that we are not this life air, that good. We have still 5 verses to go, and then we will look at the details. The 5 material elements, the 10 senses and the mind all combine to form various parts of the gross and subtle bodies. The living entity comes in contact with the material bodies, whether high or low, and later gives them up by personal prowess. This strength can be perceived in a living entity's personal power to possess different types of bodies. So Srila Prabhupada explains the technique, how we get different kinds of bodies, that Yanti Deva Vrata Devan Pitrin Yanti Prati Vrata Bhutani Yanti Bhuteya Yanti Matshachinopimam. Those who worship the demigods, they go to the demigods. Those who worship the ghosts and spirits will take a birth among such beings. Those who worship the ancestors go to the ancestors. Those who worship me come to me, Krishna says. That Srila Prabhupada explains that. And also Kamaraj Prahyo, that Prahlad Maharaj little further will explain that to his schoolmates. This human form is Sudurlabha, rarely obtained, very valuable, because with this body you can't, with the human body, you can expand your consciousness unlimited into spiritual consciousness. And then Prabhupada quotes the verse, Savasyam Redisam Vistamiti Smit Mata Smitranamapamsa. For me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So if we surrender to Krishna, then he gives us directions how to go back to Godhead. And end this life of this, end this material existence. But if we don't want that, then we continue our material existence in various ways. As long as the spirit soul is covered by the subtle body consisting the mind, intelligence, false ego, is bound to the results of fruitive activities. Because of this covering, the spirit soul is connected with the material energy and thus accordingly suffer material conditions and reversals continually life after life. This means we have to give up this material body. This subtle body. We have to kill the subtle body. Otherwise, we go on in the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. How do we destroy the subtle body? The subtle body has 3 elements: mind, intelligence, false ego. The false ego is there because mind and intelligence are contaminated by material desires, by lust, anger, greed, madness, illusion, envy, and so on. And how do we purify the mind, spiritualize the mind? By thinking of Krishna, manmana. And how do we purify the intelligence? By transcendental knowledge. We get transcendental knowledge by performing devotional service. But that is, the mind and the intelligence is purified. And when it's completely purified, that's called liberation. And then we kill the subtle body by spiritualizing it. And then our real thinking, feeling, and willing from the spirit soul is again coming into place. That thinking and feeling, willing of the spirit soul can only be used in Krishna's service. That's spiritual. So it's explained in the purport, yes. Living entity is bound by the subtle body, by this contaminated mind and intelligence. And according to that contamination, yam yam vapismram vam tiantantika leveram, you get a new body. So if a living being resists the dictation of the mind and engages the mind in loving service of the Lord, that's what we have to do. We cannot become degraded. So always engage your mind, your hearing, your senses, everything in the service of Krishna. And like Ambarish, Savaimana Krishna Padarvinyo, Vachams Vakunt, Gunanu Varnani, that so the mind is engaged in the lotus feet of Krishna. So yes, by that we can make progress towards liberation. So then Prabhupada said the Paramatma is never affected by our sinful activities. And he quotes Svetasvatara Upanishad, 2 birds in a tree, one is eating the fruit and the other is observing and permitting the Paramatma and the Jivatma. But yes, Paramatma observes everything we do, witnesses, and gives us later reactions. So it is fruitless to see and talk of the material modes of nature and their resultant so-called happiness and distress as if they were factual. When the mind and distress caused by the material senses it should be understood to be meaningless. So this so-called happiness and distress of the body is meaningless. And that is difficult to realize. As long as we are attached to this meaningless happiness and distress, we are conditioned. Can someone read the first paragraph of the purport, please?
Thank you so much.
Please.
The happiness and distress derived from the activities of the material senses are not actual happiness and distress. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita speaks of happiness that is transcendental to the material conception of life. Sukham atyantikam yattat buddhi grahyam atindriyam. When our senses are purified of material contamination, they become atindriya, transcendental senses. And when the transcendental senses are engaged in the service of the master of the senses, Rishikesha, one can derive real transcendental pleasure. Whatever distress or happiness we manufacture by the mental concoction through the settled mind has no reality, but is simply a mental concoction. One should therefore not imagine so-called happiness through mental concoction. Rather, the best course is to engage the mind in the service of the Lord, Rishikesha, and thus feel real blissful life.
So the real pleasure is an ecstatic feeling of love towards Krishna and the devotees. That is the happiness of the soul, and that's blissful life. That even the body may suffer, but the advanced devotee inwards experience bliss, the bliss of the soul. Yes. Can someone read the second paragraph, the last one?
Please, statement. Please continue, Madhu.
There is a Vedic statement Apanam Sonam Amritam Ashrutam Apshrubhir Viharam. With reference to such a conception, one want to go to the heavenly planet to enjoy with the young girls there and drink Somrasa. Such imaginary pleasure, however, has no value, confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7.23. Antavatam tu phalam tesham tat bhagvat alpa medasam. Men of small intelligence worship the demigod and their fruits are limited and temporary. Even if by fruitive active or worship of the demigod, one is elevated to the higher practice system for sense enjoyment. The situation is condemned in Bhagavad Gita as antavat, perishable. The happiness one enjoy in the way is like the pleasure of embracing a young girl in a dream. For some time it may be pleasing, but actually the basic principle is false. The mental compositions of happiness and distress in this material world are compared to the dreams because of their falseness. All thoughts of obtaining happiness by using the material sense have a false background and therefore have no meaning.
Yes, so happiness of the material senses, no meaning. And this is the concluding verse of this one story. Those who have full knowledge of self-realization will know very well that the spirit soul is eternal, whereas the body is perishable, are not overwhelmed by lamentation, but persons who lack knowledge of self-realization certainly lament. Therefore, it is difficult to educate a person in illusion, and that this is the big illusion in the material world. In the Mahabharata, it is stated the Yaksha spoke to Yudhishthira Maharaj, asked him the question, what is the most amazing thing in this world? And Yudhishthira Maharaj replied, everyone is working in this world and making plans like they are going to settle here permanent, but it's all temporary, that it has no meaning. So according to the Mimamsa philosophers, everything is eternal, nitya, and according to the Sankhya philosopher, everything is mithya or anitya, impermanent. Nonetheless, without knowledge of the Atma of the soul, such philosophers must be bewildered and must continue to lament as Sudras. So the Karma Mimamsa and this atheistic Sankhya philosophy, that if Krishna is not in the picture, it's all bewilderment. They cannot explain where things are coming from. Prahlad Maharaj said, Shrotta vyadini rajana nrinam santi sahasrasya apashyatam tatvam hre medinam. Those who are materially engrossed, being blind to knowledge of the ultimate truth, have many subjects for hearing in human society. O Emperor, for ordinary person engaged in material activities, there are many subject matters to understand, because such persons do not understand self-realization. One must therefore be educated in self-realization, so that under any circumstances in life he will be steady in his vows. That now we go to here. We go back. We have heard about the role of providence, within our life. The purpose of providence is to let us understand that since everything is dependent on the free will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our only duty is to surrender to Him and seek His protection. So we have discussed Krishna gives the reactions, and He has His own free will why He does things. We cannot protest against it or or ask him for explanation. But everything he does is for our good. The happiness that he gives in devotional service is to inspire us, and the suffering that we get to rectify us. And so we should surrender to him, seek his protection. That's the purpose of providence. And the devotee sees that and is happy satisfied in all circumstances of life. That Yamaraj's teachings repeat the essence. The body is only a temporary covering of the soul. There is no reason to lament for the loss of the body. Similarly, the happiness and distress caused by the material senses should be understood to be meaningless. That when one is self-realized, one doesn't lament. That was the conclusion that we read. Explain why the young boy considered as meaningless both happiness and distress. Could be a good question for your exam. The happiness and distress caused by the material senses should be understood to be meaningless. They are like the happiness and distress in a dream. The happiness one enjoys in this way, like the pleasure of embracing a young woman in a dream for some time, it may be pleasing, but actually the basic principle is false. The mental concoctions of happiness and distress in this material world are compared to dreams because of their falseness. Although thoughts of obtaining happiness by using the material senses have a false background and therefore have no meaning. A simply moral story of Yamaraj narrated of the Kolinga birds. That is the last story that we will see later. Are there any comments or questions, please? What did we learn here today? That it's interesting, the preaching of Hiranyakasipu. It's a big demon who is speaking here. And he does not want to apply it. He used it only to get rid, to help his relatives to come over their lamentation. Good, then we will have a pause now. It's 10 to 5 in New Delhi. So we will resume at 10 past 5 in 90 minutes. Hare Krishna, Jai Prabhupada.
Recording stopped.